Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a book review from Series 2000, and it's book number 17, The Werewolf in the Living Room. When I was a child, I loved this book. I loved how dark and gritty this book got. I liked how out there the story was, and I had some fond memories about it. And then I reread it recently. And upon re-examination, I think this book is no longer loved by me. I like it. I like certain things about it, but I just think this book is just a big swing and a miss of a book. It's unfortunate. I can get into all the negatives now, but I'm going to save them for near the end of the video. It's kind of a disappointment, though, with the whole Werewolf review-a-thon within Goosebumps I've been doing with Michael Goosebumps fan and Monster Blood. The descriptions are in the video. I already know what Monster Blood thinks about it. I'm dying to know what Michael thinks. I hope he reviews this soon. But yeah, it's just a big swing and a miss. I'm just going to leave it at that for now and then get in what I think about it at the end. But yeah. So, in a nutshell, let's get into the plot without giving too much away. This book is kind of easy to spoil, so I'll keep it, light for you. So this kid named Aaron starts off the story by revealing a lot about himself. His mother died 2 years prior, which gained some sympathy off the bat. He's lost his mom. He only has one parent, which is his father. He's a sheriff back in his hometown, back in the United States, and he's an aspiring werewolf hunter. Ultimately revealed within the first few chapters, Aaron was having a nightmare, and once he wakes from the nightmare, he realizes that he's by himself in this tent in the middle of this country called Bratvia. Now, Bratvia is the location center for part one of the book. And then the second part is centered back in the United States. So, the first 15 chapters take place in this European country called Bratvia. But, Aaron awakes in the tent by himself, scared out of his mind from a nightmare. He's trying to find his dad. And when he wanders out a little bit, he's hearing some noises, and he wanders. And he stumbles across a werewolf. Now, what happens to Aaron is that he gets bit by this werewolf. And then not too long after, he gets a pendant thrown at him of a tooth around necklace wire, which come to find out later that might mean something. But Aaron's been bit. He passes out, and his father, wakes him up and says, "Hey, look, I found you out in the woods. Are you okay?" Aaron doesn't mention anything to his father, but he realizes he actually was bit, but he doesn't know what to say. He's been bitten by a werewolf, And his father says, "We need to get some rest because we're going to go out and look for werewolf tracks tomorrow to try to find the werewolf and who the werewolf is." So the next day comes around. His father is making breakfast. Aaron and his father are talking around the campfire. And his father says, "Okay, well, let's go find the werewolf." And what happens is they go into the woods. Aaron becomes lost, basically. And his father is nowhere to be found. Aaron gets so lost that he stumbles across this shack, which has this old woman at the door, basically this scary old woman, asking what does he want. He says he's lost, and she invites him in and says, "Hey, look, you should come in here. It's not safe in the woods." This old woman basically reveals this lore story behind the town in Bratvia where they were staying in the woods. And long ago, a man came to the town, and once the man came to the town, a bunch of werewolf things started happening. And she says it's not safe, shouldn't be here. And then she notices that he's marked and asks him to leave, and Aaron has to escape because this lady's basically forcing him out of her domicile. And then eventually he catches up with his dad, And his dad's convinced that he's found the tracks that lead up to where the real werewolf is. Next thing you know, this bald man's being captured, and this bald man has a name by the name of Ben. And Ben is swearing up and down that he's innocent, he's not this werewolf, but his dad is convinced, and what he plans on doing is shackling him, taking him out of Bratvia so he can take him back to the United States and broadcast to the whole world that werewolves exist, and he's going to get rich and famous off of it. So, against Aaron's wishes, Aaron thinks this guy, he can't be a werewolf. He's a scrawny, bald guy. You know, he looks harmless. But unfortunately, they have to take him home. So they get on the ship to go home. And Aaron almost basically dies of drowning, which Ben saves his life. So Aaron feels a little bit indebted to Ben in a way. But his father still wants to show the world that Ben's going to transform on a full moon and prove that werewolves exist. So that basically ends part one, and then part two happens back in the States. Cuts to Aaron's house, and they have set up a cage in the living room to house Ben. And when Aaron gets there, he has a real life friend who really wants to meet this werewolf. And after she begs him a bunch of times, Aaron decides, okay, well, you can come over and see the werewolf. And what she sees horrifies her, because she sees a innocent-looking man being caged in the living room. And she says that his dad has lost his mind, like really has lost his mind for doing this. This is so wrong on so many levels. But Aaron basically can't do anything. He has to go along with it because he's going through some things in his own head about, you know, what may be the case or not. But he also feels like he has to support his dad. So what ends up happening is his father reveals that there's a full moon coming up. They're going to have all of these anchors come by and set up, you know, the recording devices they need to set up so they can broadcast it to the world. And Aaron has a change of heart with Ben and decides that, you know, since Ben saved Aaron's life, he wants to save Ben, so he lets Ben free. And Aaron's dad freaks out on him and like basically says, why'd you do that? Now we have to go find Ben. And then what happens is later that night, a full moon comes out, and you guessed it, Aaron changes into a werewolf. And a bunch of things happen, like his best friend has a pet dog, was taking it to a dog show. Apparently the werewolf broke into the dog show and killed her dog. Pretty dark. She seemed pretty upset about it. The werewolf was causing, you know, terror. And Aaron realizes that this whole pendant thing has marked him as a werewolf, and maybe the pendant is a sign of protection or something. It doesn't really go into too much depth. So he decides to try to tell somebody, but he can't really tell them. Nobody would believe him, I guess. And then a second night happens where he comes to realize all these bad things, you know, are about to happen. But then he comes to this realization that a second werewolf is out there. So this whole time he's trying to convince himself that Ben may or may not have been this werewolf, but now he's convinced that Ben is a werewolf and there's a second one. And his father thinks there's still only one. And there's this whole ordeal that happens with Aaron and his father. There's this big revelation to Aaron's dad. And Aaron's dad, you know, as any father would, did something really powerful in the situation and tried to save his son. And then upon doing that, Aaron realizes that he has to be a hero after being locked in a cage from his father. He has to save people and overcome his own fears, and this is where he grows up a little, and, you know, he escapes out of his house and stops the other werewolf, which they both end up being captured. And this is where I want to leave it, because if I go into any more, it's going to spoil it. But let's just say there's 2 werewolves at the end, possibly a third. And the ending is just so beyond dumb. I can't even comprehend. And that's basically what I thought of Werewolf in the Living Room. Alright, so off the bat, let's talk about the strengths first. I liked Aaron and his father's relationship in this story. Very impactful stuff going on. I kind of liked the sympathy with Ben. The whole Ben-Aaron dynamic was pretty cool, even though it was kind of skimmed over. Really good stuff. There's some scary scenes in this book. The old lady scene in Bratvia was really scary. The initial meeting of Aaron and the werewolf for the first time. Back in the States, there was a really jarring scene when Aaron's a werewolf that really sticks with me in a way. Some morbid stuff going on, especially with the body changes. It's very descriptive in this book. You're going to get a good amount of body horror. Relationships are pretty good. Characters are, they're not the greatest characters, but they work. But the negatives, oh boy. I don't know where to begin with this book. Okay, I guess I'll go into the big encompassing problem. There's a scope issue with this book. And what I mean by scope is this book is trying to have a big scope. It has a part 1 and a part 2. And I feel like at one point, the book had bigger scope. But I feel like at some point in the editing process, maybe, where this happened, this book was severely trimmed and condensed. And that's how this book felt throughout the entire read. It just felt like a condensed book. And what I mean by that is that you'll have these ideas, but they'll be skimmed over. You'll have these plot points that you are told that happened, but you don't really know how it happened because there was no elaboration because everything was skimmed over. It happened in both parts. And I feel like the bigger part that struggled with this was Bratvia's part, because 5 chapters were designated to like a dream sequence and setting up Aaron and his backstory. And then we only had 10 chapters of Bratvia, which had some really good stuff in it. And I feel like if they're going to do a part 1 and part 2, they could have easily made this a bigger book, or maybe made it like a Invasion of the Body Squeezers part 1 and part 2 scenario, with book 1 being Bratvia and book 2 being back in the States. I feel like that was probably the initial idea behind it, and I could see that direction, but the execution was just terrible. I'm sorry. It was just bad on both parts. That was from the condensing of the material and the skimming through everything. On top of that, it introduces this idea of a pendant. And while it tries to set up some lore in it, in doing that, it gives nods to werewolf skin in the process, going over what Aaron has learned about werewolves in the past. This whole pendant thing is supposed to be like the mark of the werewolf in the story. And there's a scene later on where Aaron gives his pendant to somebody else. And I thought the pendant would do something, because maybe I thought the pendant was supposed to signify like the ability to change. But that wasn't the case at all. It just didn't make any sense behind the reasoning of having the pendant in the first place. They made it set up in Bratvia like having the pendant was a well-known thing, that you are a werewolf. But when it comes down to the utilization of the pendant later on in the story, it really doesn't matter whether the pendant's being worn or not. So I guess it's there for identifying purposes with the father and stuff. I just felt like it was kind of lazily put in there and not expanded on. Not to mention the whole thing with Ben. There's a big revelation with Ben in the story. It was kind of disturbing initially. I mean, it's kind of disturbing, like uprooting somebody, basically imprisoning them in your own house. I just don't see that how realistic that is. It's kind of disturbing. And then on the same token, the whole revelation with Ben was very skimmed over. Like, it's basically told that, may or may not be Ben as the second werewolf, explicitly, but it never really elaborates on that. And I say that without spoiling it, because I can tell you who the second werewolf is, but if I tell you that, it kind of ties into the ending, which I don't want to spoil, because let's face it, the lead up to the ending was very good, but the ending itself killed the steam it had. There was a really cool idea with the father and his decision what to do with these werewolves, including his son being one of them. And one of the werewolves have to make a decision in the moment, and something happens, and then it kind of summarizes in like maybe a paragraph of what happens after that situation, and that's how the story ends. And I'm not gonna lie, it's one of the weakest endings I've ever read, especially for a book this dark. I was hoping for something better than that. The lead up was there, but the execution, like the rest of the book, just felt really off. And yeah, basically, in a nutshell, that's how I feel about Werewolf in the Living Room. So from a 0 to 5 stars, I'm gonna be honest, I'm struggling to even give this book a 4 or higher. So it's gonna be less than a 4. I know. I think it's gonna be between a 3.5 and a 3.9. Where I landed on it after deducting points here, I'll tell you what I deducted points on. How skimmed through and condensed this book felt, I deducted 0.5. I deducted another 0.5 for the whole pendant inconsistencies and this skimming through Ben as a character, even some parts of Aaron being skimmed over. I deducted another 0.5. Then I deducted a 0.3 for the ending. It just was a very weak ending. So I gave it a 3.7 out of 5 altogether. Very average book. It's running the same scale with the other average books who have similar problems that aren't deal breakers to the story. It's very rushed, skimmed over, condensed feel. I don't say I love it anymore, I just say I like it. So yeah, that's basically what I think about The Werewolf in the Living Room. Let me know in the comment section, did you love this book or did you hate this book? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.